I'm Bucky and I'm going to be your host today for our panel, Comics to Screen and Back Again. Today we're going to be chatting with a few of our guests about their experiences taking their comic books into the wonderful world of movies, TV and animation. We'll also be discussing how one might go about bringing fans of those adaptations back to comic books. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our lovely panellists today. First up, we have the excellent Alice Oseman. Alice is an author, illustrator and screenwriter known for YA fiction such as Loveless and Radio Silence, along with acclaimed webcomic Heartstopper, which is currently being adapted for TV. Next, we have the glorious Hamish Steele. Hamish is an Eisner Award-winning comics creator, animation director and showrunner. He's the writer-artist of Pantheon and Dead Endia, with the latter coming to Netflix as an animated series in 2022. And lastly, but by no means leastly, we have comics veteran Charlie Adlard. Charlie is a comic artist known for his work on The Walking Dead, X-Files, 2000 AD, Marvel, DC, just about everything. And The Walking Dead obviously needs no introduction. Having run for 11 seasons and countless spin-offs, it's arguably one of the most successful comic book adaptations out there. Now that we've got the introductions out of the way, we're going to jump into a few questions. I'll have a few of my own, and then towards the end I'll open it up to you guys for some audience Q&A, so get thinking if you've got questions. First up, I would love to hear a little bit about the process behind your individual adaptations. So how is it initially getting that interest from production companies? Were you offered the chance to be closely involved right off the bat, or was it something you had to fight for?
So Heartstopper was optioned by Seesaw Films back in 2018, and they approached me and my agent after seeing kind of how Heartstopper blew up when I did the self-published Kickstarter. They got in touch with me. I really loved like everything that they had to say and all their ideas for the show, so I decided to work with them. And we developed the show kind of throughout 2019 and 2020, and they wanted me to write it, so I was the one who was writing it. And so that we were doing that for quite a while, and then we got interest from Netflix, and Netflix finally gave us the green light in early this year, January this year. And then we filmed the show between April and June, and now we're in the post-production process.
I, about 10 years ago, made a YouTube short called Dead End for Cartoon Hangover and Frederator, so I'm kind of an animation director and comics person sort of at the same time. That then turned into a webcomic, which turned into a graphic novel, which is now turning back into a show. And so I guess my process was that during that 10 years, I was actually pitching quite a lot of different shows, not based on my comics, and in just development at places like Disney and the BBC and stuff. And everything fell through for one reason or another, whatever I was developing. And then the one thing that actually got some traction was when I could say like, oh, I have a graphic novel as well, are you interested in reading that? And that sort of got us through the door also at Netflix. And I didn't have to fight too hard to sort of so I'm show running it. But that's because I already had the kind of animation experience as well. I think possibly more so than the comics experience. So yeah, I didn't have to fight particularly hard.
Once upon a time, me and Robert Kirkman, we'd done a zombie comic together. And this is, 18 years ago now. And yeah, the story of how The Walking Dead got to be the TV show and everything else it is a fairly complex one, but it's a really good example of the sort of the Hollywood feeding frenzy that is San Diego Comic-Con, basically. And I sort of experienced it firsthand, especially those sort of formative years of the comic, where it was sort of starting to make waves within the industry, and people were sort of sitting up and taking notice, and you'd be sat behind your table and there'd just be these people you'd never met before, obviously, always very young, very young people, and just looking at your whatever you had in front and going, is this option? Is this option? Is this option? And they're all these young Hollywood execs sort of thing, just literally just getting piles of stuff to take back to whatever film production, TV production company, they work for. And we sort of struck gold after a couple of false starts. I mean, we were very lucky to begin with because we had Frank Darabont, the film director, sort of working behind the scenes always, even when the show sort of fell out. Originally, it fell out of the option, and he kept trying to push it, which was really amazing because he didn't have to do that, and he was obviously very committed to whatever it would become already, and finally got it in at AMC, and the rest is history.
Was there anything in your work that didn't make it into the shows but you wished it had?
For me, no, but there are things that are in the comics of Heartstopper that are not in the show. There are certain characters who are not going to be appearing in the show, but because I had so much control over the show, all things like that were my decision. So characters that were left out they're left out for a reason, because TV shows are a different medium to comics, and things that work in comics and books don't necessarily work in TV shows. So the big changes that are made between the comics and the show were things that I'm very happy with, and hopefully things that the readers will be happy with as well.
Yeah, I actually feel very similar, because I've often thought that if someone had taken my books and said, we're going to adapt this and you're not involved, I would have been very stick to the letter, every character, don't cut anything. But because I was in the writer's room, I was usually the one saying, oh yeah, scrap that character. I don't know what I was thinking when I wrote that. And it was actually quite relieving, because I'd spent 10 years developing other shows, and I'd always been trying to get queer characters in animated kids media. And so I got quite used to, I got sort of, Netflix said in kind of the early stages of the development, whenever we bring up the queer stuff, you're always wanting to change the subject. And it's because I'd had this experience at other studios where I just sort of assumed if I wanted to put any of that stuff in the show, I'd have to sneak it in season 3 sometime, or just make it subtextual. But that's definitely the reason they wanted the show. And so it took me a while to accept that I didn't actually have to, I don't know, whenever I was pitching shows, I always assumed that was something I'd have to cut or fight for, or because I'd had those experiences before. So similarly, I feel like every edit and cut is something that I have decided, because I feel like when I originally made the comic, it was just a web comic, writing it on my own, and then I had a team of writers and lots of people who knew a lot more about writing a show than I did. So I was very open to changing it.
Well, my experience is slightly different, partly because I wasn't nowhere near as closely involved with the TV shows you guys were. Primarily because I live here in the UK and they're shooting it at Atlanta, in the US. Me pretty much being the only prime, person involved with The Walking Dead that wasn't American, and so it was really hard to sort of get involved, to be honest. But having said that, it was, I know it's a cliche, but the people initially who were making the show were all massive fans of the book initially, so they put as much of what Robert and I did into those first few seasons as much as we're certainly happy with it, and I appreciate, like these two guys have said, comics is a different medium to film, so you know, I wasn't upset if they were jettisoning stuff or putting stuff in. I mean, for something like The Walking Dead, obviously, you know, 10, 11, or was it 10 seasons, 11 seasons? I can't remember now. Anyway, it's, you know, there's certain things that, you know, characters in the TV show, you know, especially people like Carl the kid, you know, he's growing up quite fast in 11 years, so, you know, we can keep him young in the comic book. So there's certain things you can do in the comic which you could never do in the TV show. People sign contracts, people want more money, you know, things like that. So, you know, it's just dealing with the logistics of something like that with the TV show, which obviously when you're doing a comic is just, you know, you don't have to deal with. So that's, you know, that's why I thought I'd personally just stick to drawing and sit at my home back here in the UK, rather than trying to get too deeply involved and consequently very frustrated with the show.
Alice and Hamish, I know you've been kind of directly involved in adapting your work for the screen. Could you speak a little bit on the challenges you found in working on those adaptations?
Well, I'd never written a screenplay before I did Heartstopper, so I had to basically learn how to write a screenplay. I had no idea what the format was, so I went away and I read a load of screenplays of TV shows that I liked, and just kind of learn how, you know, what sort of things I needed to put in a script, because it's not the same as writing a novel or a comic. You're not writing for a reader to enjoy the story necessarily. You're writing for a director and actors to interpret what you've written and turn it into something visual. So that was a challenge, because I've never done it before, but it was really, really fun. And in some ways there are some similarities, because comics is such a dialogue-heavy medium, and so is writing a screenplay. Yeah, that was kind of the main challenge for me, figuring out, like, plotting is a big one in TV, how to keep an audience engaged, which is very different from writing Heartstopper, which is quite a slow sort of... There's not a lot of really intense tension in Heartstopper. It's quite a slow story, and just lots of happy moments, whereas in the TV show we need to keep people engaged and keep the drama going. So it was learning stuff like that I could only really learn as I was doing it, but it was really fun, so
Yeah.
It's not one for me.
I mean, so I worked with a writer's room, and I did end up co-writing quite a bit of it, but initially just trying to get a room, our writer's room was really great, trying to get everyone onto the same page sort of with the tone when a show doesn't exist yet. So we have these two comics, and our show is part comedy, part horror, part like teen... Oh.
Sorry.
Part comedy, part horror, part sort of teen drama, and so some of our writers came from kind of 11-minute Disney comedy cartoons, and one of them came from Hollyoaks, one of them came from writing like short films. So we had like a lot of different experiences, and especially in the UK, we don't quite have the same kind of conveyor belt of TV shows happening in the animated sector. So, you know, if we made the show over there, there'd be our whole writers' room would have worked on hundreds of shows, and in our writers' room it was quite a mix. So, some of the first scripts that came in were way too wacky for me, and very sort of slapstick comedy, and I had to rein that in. Some of them were way too like Riverdale and like too kind of teen and adult. And because in animation, it's changing a little bit now, but a lot of people have to kind of pitch shows for the kind of 8 to 12 market, and then as they're writing, that's when they sort of realize who the actual audience is. So we pitched quite a lighter comedy show, and then while writing it became much more of kind of episodic mystery show, and the stakes got higher and the emotions got higher and things. So it took a lot of season 1 to write and to work out the tone. And it kind of wasn't until we got an episode finished that we realized what the show was. And yeah, so that was definitely a challenge, but it was a really fun challenge. And I feel like, again, in the writer's room, it was the other writers who kept wanting to use the book as the reference and say, oh, we should keep this, we should keep that. And I was the one saying, like, nah, cut it, merge those 2 characters, it's fine. Because it was actually quite nice getting an opportunity to basically redraft the webcomic I started when I was like 20, because I didn't have as much writing experience, and I could go back and smooth everything out, I think.
Cool. Charlie, you were the 2017 to 2019 Comics Laureate. Part of that role was speaking on and encouraging the use of comic books as an accessible educational tool. Do you think the rise of adaptations like The Walking Dead or the Marvel Cinematic Universe, for example, aid in exposing the medium of comics to a larger audience?
Yes and no. I mean, I don't think what DC and Marvel do aren't really helping our industry. Not maliciously, obviously, but you know, if you go to the people that go to the cinema, the millions of people who go and see a Marvel movie, a tiny fraction of those people are picking up those comic books, and everyone now knows, you know, most people, like my son, my youngest son, he's 16, you know, he loves all the Marvel movies. I go and see it's a good excuse for me to go and see every single Marvel movie, actually, because he wants to see them. But he's got a broader knowledge of Marvel characters from seeing the movies than he has from reading any comic books, because he doesn't really read comic books. I think it's really useful for properties like The Walking Dead, though, because it hasn't got that brand recognition. You know, everyone knows who Spider-Man is, regardless of whether, you know, it's a comic book or a film or a TV show or whatever. No one knew The Walking Dead was a comic book before the TV show. Having said that, not many people still know The Walking Dead's a comic book. I mean, you guys do, obviously, but you know, if I meet people in the street, you know, and the conversation gets down to what do you do, and I say, you know, I'm a cartoonist, and you know, the conversation gets a bit more, you know, what do you do and stuff, and you know, my default thing is, you've heard of The Walking Dead, and inevitably they say yes, and inevitably they don't know it was a comic book, even though it blatantly says it at the beginning of every single episode. But it just goes to show how, you know, these things are sort of, not buried, but, I mean, the small fraction, you know, the small fraction of people that have picked up the book because of the TV show is more than enough to, you know, sort of make the book sell in the, you know, obviously the tens and tens of thousands, you know, I mean, and go global and, you know, be reprinted, you know, 30 different languages, etc., etc. You know, that's all because of the TV show. That's not because of just being a, you know, a fairly successful comic book in its own right. So yeah, we've got a lot to thank the TV show for. But, you know, like I say, it is literally, you know, the book gets read by, you know, thousands of people. The TV show gets seen by millions of people. There's a big difference.
Yeah, I used to be a comics retailer, and The Walking Dead, you would get people go, I want to get started with The Walking Dead comics. Be like, okay, well, there's 20-something volumes. I want issue 1. I'm like, there's volume 1? No, I want the first issue. I'm like, you might have a hard time with that.
Well, no, so it's quite interesting, because years and years prior to this, I did, like I said, the X-Files comic book, so it was a reverse situation. I was adapting a TV show, and that was very successful, as in everything else associated with the X-Files. But when that all finished, I just assumed that I'd be a known person within my own industry until I realised that the only people picking up X-Files comic books were X-Files TV show fans. They weren't going into comic book shops and picking up any other comics. You know, they were going into the shops and just literally, you know, zeroing in on the X-Files and exiting straight away afterwards. So, kind of my name within the industry was almost like starting over again, because no one realised, you know, it looked to the comic book industry that I just vanished off the face of the earth for about 2.5 years. So, yeah, it just goes to show how sometimes these things just don't link up very well.
Same with Star Trek. Star Trek people only buy Star Trek comics.
Absolutely, yeah.
If you could pick any of your work to be adapted for screen next, what would it be and why?
I think, for those of you who know of my YA novels, because I write YA prose novels as well, I would pick Radio Silence to be adapted, which is the story of two teenagers who are both aspiring to like top universities, but then through their friendship they kind of discover that they don't want to go to university, they want to make creative things. I think that would be a cool TV show, but I expect Heartstopper will be my life for the next few years, so I have no room to think about that.
Well, if I said more Dead Endia books, then I might get more seasons. I've got a new book out, which I'm signing just after this, just a little plug, called Crock and Roll. And it's based, I wanted to do something of the anthropomorphic animals of attitude genre, which...
oh, that genre.
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Biker Mice on Mars, more, where did they go? What happened? So I made a book inspired by that, and so I would love to make a live-action adaptation using those same, like, uncanny animatronic Teenage Turtles puppets, but crocodiles. Just because I think, you know, I miss Howard the Duck. I miss something that chills me to my bone and is now rotting in a warehouse somewhere in Hollywood. Yeah.
Well, I did a French comic book a couple of years back called Vampire State Building, and to be honest, the only reason I did it was because it was called Vampire State Building, and it was one of those moments where I thought, surely somebody's come up with that title before, but apparently not. So, and it was, yeah, with the two French writers. One of them was a TV, so he was more of a TV writer than a comic. He had written comic books before, but he was quite involved with French television, and the other guy was more of a comic book writer. But you know, I think deep down inside we were all sort of writing this book with that kind of Hollywood high concept pitch in mind. So just on a purely commercial basis, I think that would make a great adaptation. And we've tried, but ironically it hasn't cottoned on anywhere. Every single creator-owned thing I've done has been optioned, literally, over the years, which is not saying anything because, you know, hundreds and hundreds of things get optioned every year, and probably 0.5 or less than 0.5% of these things ever make it past the option period. So, you know, I've sort of got used to that kind of Hollywood interest, and I don't even get excited anymore because you just think, oh, I'll just put that to the side and let it, you know, if it happens, great. If it doesn't, fine. So, yeah. Anything I do would make a brilliant TV show stroke movie.
I just want to say, I feel sort of similar in that, like, yeah, it would be great for anything to be adapted, but it depresses me a little bit. I've been pitching to a few publishers, and you get the feeling from some publishers that's all they want, that they're not really looking for a comic book, they're looking for something they can pitch to a TV studio. And some publishers have, like, deals with studios where just like every book gets optioned towards them. And I think sometimes that can be a little, when I'm pitching something, I feel like I'm already self-editing like the budget and the like, well, could you make a TV show out of that? I guess not. And I think that's a little sad.
Oh yeah,
as someone who has a TV show being made a show.
No, I mean, working in the more, sort of, shall we say, commercial sector of the comic book industry, you know, you just can see certain writers are just pitching IPs. You know, there's some series is announced, you just think, yep, they could see the movie in that one, you know, and I mean, it's good in it's kind of good in one way, because they are, at least they're sort of thing, well, I've got this idea and make a great movie, but hey, let's make a comic book, because it is, at least I can get the idea out there, you know.
Yeah.
So I'm not, you know, sort of slagging it off, but
no, neither am I. I think it's also kind of maybe telling that in my career of trying to pitch TV shows, the first one to actually happen and the smoothest journey has been the one that had a comic book. And I feel like it's almost...
Because they can see the visual.
Yeah, it's much harder trying to tell a TV exec, like, you know, trying to create an image in their head. It's much easier to just like slide it across the table and say, lots of people like this. And they're like, ooh, quick.
Yeah, no, one thing that's always become apparent to me, having peripherally been involved with all this sort of stuff, is the unimaginativeness of TV execs. You know, they would much prefer a property given to them rather than, sort of come up to somebody and say, create me something. You know, it's always, so much easier if you've got something to, for them, like I say, to option or whatever.
This is my last one before we open it up to you guys. If you've got questions, you can line up at the mic there. Don't all run at once because I will cry. But my last one is, if you have got people that are coming from these shows to the comic books, have you found kind of an effective way as the comics creator to connect and engage with those new fans that are coming from the shows?
I did a couple of what they call Walker Stalker cons back in the day, which were the Walking Dead cons, and they were at Olympia. They did loads over in the States, but I never went to any of those. But when they came over to the UK, they asked me to come. And I found it quite ironic that I had the shortest queue, for starters. But then more people joined the queue because they saw I was giving away product, because I was drawing stuff rather than just signing photographs and charging less. Again, it was really odd, because I reckon a good third of those people in that queue probably didn't know who I was. Yeah, they could just see a shorter queue, so they'd just queue up for this one will only take 45 minutes as opposed to the queue for Norman Reedus, which will take, 3 hours to get to him. So, it was, hopefully those few people I managed to convince that, oh, did you realise it was a comic? I don't know where I was going with that, actually.
I think that was a good answer, yeah.
Someone else talk.
Well, I mean, it's difficult to answer that question for me, really, because Heartstopper hasn't come out yet. So all the people who are getting excited about the show are generally people who have read the comics and who love the comics. I feel optimistic that when the show comes out, some people will be drawn to the comics purely because of the style of the show. How many scenes in the show are literally exactly the same as in the comic, and how when the show comes out people will think, oh, this is a really cool style, like maybe I should try the comic and see if I like that as well. But that remains to be seen, so we'll find out.
Yeah, my show's not out either, so I'm not really sure. I'm quite interested to know if I have to choose my words carefully.
Especially because it's not come out yet.
Netflix snipers. But the first series doesn't cover all of the book. So I'm interested to know if people read the book and like catch ahead, and if I'm lucky enough to have a fandom, if like some people have the secrets of what's going to happen and some people don't. I'm interested to know what sort of that looks like, and if stuff in the book is considered spoilers or something. So who knows? Ask me next year, hopefully.
I think you'll probably find we're all back well, as obviously I've experienced this for quite a few years, but I think you'll find we'll all be back at our tables or whatever, signing for about the same sort of audience, regardless, next year or however, even if you have a worldwide smash or anything like that. Because, like I said before, you've got millions of people tuning into Netflix or whatever, watching this thing, and unless somebody comes and slaps every single viewer over the head and tells them this is a comic book, most people won't realise it. So the main audience will not be coming to these sort of things.
One of the most humbling things of my life was one of the very, very first conventions I ever did. My table was right next to Brian Lee O'Malley's table, who did Scott Pilgrim, and the movie had just come out. And he was really nice, but seeing him get boxes of books out of his car and then put them up and see if his card machine was working, it was like, oh. I'm sure he's having a great time and and all that stuff. But I realized that in comic books, this is where we are, and that's great. It's really fun.
At the end of the day, that's what we do.
Yeah.
I'm a comic book artist, a cartoonist, whatever you want to call me. It's great to have this behemoth of a thing behind me, but hasn't really changed my life. I just still draw every day.
Okay. Have we got any audience questions? Leap up, leap, run.
Go faster,
Don't
faster.
run. Nobody needs to ever run anywhere. Can you believe there's people that run for fun? Disgusting.
Hello.
Hello.
So I've been curious about marketing, a show, particularly with with the movies, they've kind of they've got it handled. That they know it's Marvel or DC. But with shows like The Walking Dead or your shows coming up, I would say even something like White Last Man, where not so much the shows themselves, because they would probably use Indigo, as I say, based on the comic book, but often with marketing they would say based on the acclaimed graphic novel. And sometimes graphic novel can be a bit of a pretentious phrase. I mean, that's what you are doing with graphic novels, and they are making their way onto the TV. But some people, the market will kind of use that as a sort of pretense that, it's more sophisticated. Whereas there's nothing really wrong with, calling it a comic book. But it seems like the marketing, the network seems to have this idea that, well, if we can call it graphic novels, we could get away, even if it probably, like I said, most people who probably watch the show probably haven't read the comic. Do you think that maybe the marketing should just be a bit more, kind of not be too pretentious about it?
Well, I don't know anyone that knows what I've sort of been very vocal about is the word graphic novel, because I'm not particularly keen on that word. It was a word coined back in the 80s to sort of give you this impression that comics have grown up, and it's when somebody tries to implant another sort of phrase, stroke word on what you actually do. I call myself, when somebody, like I said, when somebody comes up to me and says, what do you do? My initial descriptions, I'll say I'm a cartoonist, which might sound a bit weird because I should be saying comic book artist or something like that, but at the end of the day, we're all cartoonists, whatever we do. I might do mine to a more, shall we say, realistic level, but I'm still taking something and distorting it and doing a more approximated image of it, and I think it's a shame we have to make excuses for what we do, and I think we draw comic books, and why is the word comic book such a dirty word in Hollywood, or not just Hollywood, in the book industry or whatever? They just feel this necessity to put the word graphic novel onto it, as if that's like, oh well, that's a graphic novel, therefore that's legitimate. That's a comic book, therefore that's not legitimate. And you just think, no, that's still as much of a comic book as the other one. I mean, we're unfortunately stuck with this word now. And yes, it has been obviously adapted by TV, Hollywood, whatever, as this sort of oh, I better not say the word comic because people think it's for kids, you know, people think it's immature or something like that. And yeah, so they will say graphic novel. You know, I don't know, it does feel like personally, it does feel like you're fighting a sort of slightly uphill battle against the legitimacy of things like that, but that's my own personal soapbox. Thank you. Anyone else?
I don't think that's a really interesting point. It's just something I've never really thought about personally. I think because I've grown up with books that we call graphic novels.
I'm much older than you, thank you.
But like, I suppose thinking about Heartstopper, there are times when I call Heartstopper a webcomic, and there are times when I call it a graphic novel, and it does depend on the context in which I'm talking about Heartstopper, because the fact of the matter is a lot of people don't even know what webcomics are. So yeah, I suppose it doesn't bother me personally, but it is interesting to think about the differences of words and like when we use them.
Well, no one knows people might not know what a web comic is, but everyone knows what a comic is, at the end of the day.
Marketing has not begun on my show, so I have no clue what they're going to call it. I know in the credits it just says the Dead Endia books, which is vague enough, I guess, but yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I can't even remember what it says at the beginning of the Walk. What does it say at the beginning of The Walking Dead now? I've forgotten. Does it say based on the comic books or based on the comic books and graphic novels by blah 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 blah? I can't remember.
I think it does. I think it does say just based on. I haven't watched Walking Dead in a long time.
No, well, same. So yeah.
I know with Why the Last Man, I think it says based on the DC comic.
Yeah.
But which does upset me because it's not Vertigo. So.
Yeah, that's true. That's interesting.
Been cancelled anyway now.
Thank you very much.
No worries.
Hi. What, in your opinion, would be the best way to familiarise the public with comics and push it more into mainstream?
God.
Well, I will just say I feel, at the moment, like I said, my show's not out and the marketing hasn't really begun, but I feel a little bit like whatever the publisher and whatever Netflix want to do, they're sort of unrelated in a way. So obviously Netflix don't want to spend any money promoting a book, they want to promote their show, whereas the publisher wants to, I guess, ride off whatever success the show has as much as possible. So
it'll benefit one more than the other. You know, you put the sticker, based on, now a TV show or whatever on the book. Obviously, you're guaranteed it's going to sell a few more just because of that little sticker, for instance.
Oh, we've had many emails about the sticker. How big is the sticker? How shiny is the sticker? When can we have the sticker? But yeah, I imagine events, if anyone wants me, some will be book events that are, wanting me to appear to promote books, and some possibly won't know there are books and just want, just because I have that dual role as being on the show as well as the showrunner, so I have no idea.
Yeah, I was just thinking, like, bringing comics into the mainstream it's really interesting in the UK in terms of YA graphic novels. When I self-published Heartstopper originally because I talked to my agent about it and she said there is no market in the UK for YA graphic novels. It's just not a thing that publishers do here. And after Heartstopper did so well self-published, suddenly a publisher was interested and wanted, to publish it traditionally. And it's interesting that even though Heartstopper has done so well in traditional publishing, still the big publishers of YA are not really investing in graphic novels. So thinking about how to bring comics into the mainstream, I would love to see more big publishers take risks on comics and graphic novels, because teenagers in particular and children absolutely love graphic novels. So I find it odd that publishers don't want to publish loads of them, basically.
I mean, my successor, Comics Laureate successor, Hannah Berry, came up with a really good... It was one of those really obvious things where you just think, oh yeah. which was basically, you know, when you go into Waterstones, this is slightly unrelated to TV adaptations, I know, but when you go into Waterstones, you know, you've got the comic book, the generally quite small comic book section in there, you know, but it's the comic book section, it's the ghettoized comic book section, it's not particularly, you know, in the forefront of anything. And she suggested, and she actually tried to get in touch with, you know, sort of the MD of Waterstones to propose this thing, this idea, which was, why can't you just file comics with the novels? So if you've got a crime comic, you put it in the crime section. You've got a science fiction comic, you put it in the science fiction section. Just put it with the novels. You know, if Waterstones are going to carry this stuff, why don't you just file? Yeah, no other type of book is sort of sectioned off like comic books. And I just thought, yeah, I mean, you know, if it's a very simple thing to do, and yet, and it would, I think, psychologically kind of make people pick those things up, because if they're filed next to, you know, a famous author or whatever, it I hate using this word, but it legitimizes it a lot more, and it might make people who would generally not pick up something like, you know, a comic book actually pick up a comic book, because it isn't in this weird little place that's in the corner away from, you know, everybody else. So I thought that was a really good idea. I don't think they're going to do it, unfortunately. So,
but it is strange. It's like having books. You know, this is the green book section, or this is the
exactly.
You know,
it's a size thing, though, isn't it? Like a novel is not the same as a graphic novel.
well, yeah, but
So
there's
if
no.
you put them in, you lose this much shelf space.
Yeah, you do get. Yeah, I know what you mean.
The comic shop's always just like, anything goes.
Yeah, well, yeah.
But it's designed for that, whereas books are in a standard size. If you standardise the size of all comics, you could.
I'd say 80% of comic book, you know, sort of collections are of a standard size. So you could quite easily sort of include them if you just make your shelf. If literally Waterstones shelving is made specifically to fit your sort of average novel, but you know, you still get, you know, sort of slightly oversized novels. You know, I've got a few. I read.
I'm afraid that is all we've got time for today. I'm so sorry to the people that were standing up, but they will kick us out if we don't get out on time. But thank you all so much for coming. Please give our panel a big round of applause. So much for being a part of our lovely Comics to Screen and Back Again panel. You can find most of these guys doing sign-ins, I think, for the rest of the day, so feel free to check that out as well. Thank you.